Welcome to 2026. We're celebrating 20 years of Remark Presents the Remarkable Podcast. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We're stopping the decks, turning down the speakers, and hearing more from the person behind the tunes. For those who don't know, Remark has been DJing since the late 1980s, first establishing himself through clubs, radio, and record stores, later evolving into a curator of long-form mixes, Twitch live streams, and podcasts that focus as much on the atmosphere and storytelling as they do on the dance floor. Back in 1997, he was interviewed as part of the documentary Remark, the story of the Orlando nightlife curfew, capturing a moment that was early in his career. Nearly 3 decades later, we're revisiting that conversation, not to retell it, but to explore what's happened since then, how his relationship with music's changed, what longevity really looks like, and how he sees the future of creativity in a rapidly changing world. Remark, it is great to have you here.
Thanks for being here.
So, for someone that's discovering you for the first time today, how would you usually describe what you do?
Yes, that's a good question, because I don't really DJ in the same way that I used to when I was younger. Now it's much more of a hobby or a passion. So if I was going to describe it, I would say that I like to tell stories through music.
Okay, and what do you hope that people will take away from that in those stories?
Well, I think, Fix, right now in this world, we're so focused on the immediate gratification of music and much really short kind of music moments. And for me, I want to tell a story through a much longer experience. And so, by being able to have someone sit and listen to some of my mixes from start to finish, that would really be what I want them to do, or what I want them to take away from my art.
Okay, so you've told your story before, particularly in the 1997 documentary, but rather than retelling it all again, I want you to reflect on it, your career with the benefit of hindsight. So if you think back to that documentary, what stands out to you the most?
I think of just how the world has changed. I think in the 1990s, when I was making that documentary, I was under the impression I was going to continue on a trajectory and become a world famous DJ. That clearly was not the plan, which is fine. I just thought at the time that was going to be my long-term goal. So looking back now, I would say that I didn't realize that the things would play out the way they did with me and my art.
What are the things that you thought, I'm so adamant that this is what's going to happen, aside from being a world famous DJ, and things that you thought, like, I couldn't have got that even more, like, any wronger, whether it be technology, the evolution of the world as a whole, or your desire to be a DJ as a career versus as a kind of side hobby?
Yeah, I think I was really under the impression at the time that playing on dance floors and working in the music industry, was going to be my long-term career path. I'm equally passionate about technology, and that's actually the trajectory that I ended up going on. But at the time, I wouldn't have thought that then. I thought I definitely would have been involved in the music industry, or would have moved to some city that would have been able to support a career in music, and dance music specifically.
So what changed that trajectory then? What were the biggest things that, like, completely changed that course?
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to that documentary, which was captured the moment when Orlando passed legislation which forced nightclubs to close. That was really what killed our nightclub scene. That's also what brought down my, I think, big DJ aspirations. I mean, for example, I was DJing in a nightclub at the time called Icon, which wasn't a late night club, but we still were the place you'd go before you went out to late night, to see late night shows. And after the late night shows stopped, and Icon started losing some of its business as well. And I remember that the manager of the club at the time brought me in and told me that the music that I was playing was no longer bringing in patrons. We'd have to change up the format. And so I was asked to play more of a commercial pop vibe, or something that was going to be outside of my normal kind of sound. And that was when I started to realize this isn't really for me. Plenty of DJs get paid to play music they don't like, and that's not something that I ever really wanted to do. So when I was asked that question to change up my format, I said I don't really want to work here anymore.
So, but you've got a really eclectic music taste, though. So I wonder, was that in formative years you were listening to multiple different genres, not just dance? So what was it about playing non-dance or non-house kind of music?
Yeah, I would say it would be non-house music. I mean, just it would be like playing stuff that you hear on the radio versus playing stuff that feels like it's more late night or more cutting edge and at the time more European or British nightclub music. That was the difference. And so one of the things I loved so much about the Orlando scene at the time is we were able to play music, introduce so many people to music they never heard before. And I also love the fact that the people that came out to dance were willing and wanting to hear something that they had never heard before. But when I was asked to start playing pop music, and in fact it was even rap and hip hop, which definitely is not my kind of cup of tea, so to speak. That's really what I started realizing, that this is not something I want to do anymore, to get paid to play music that I don't believe in.
Okay, so that sounds like it was quite a quick decision. Like, I'm not okay with that. It doesn't fit right with my style. But there must have been other scenes that you could have joined. So what was the thinking behind, were you thinking, okay, maybe I'll move to a city that's got more of an established scene, or something similar to what Orlando was like prior to the kind of curfews, where you could play the music that you liked? Was that a thought process?
It would have been an option for sure. But I think that I was so well known in the Orlando scene, and we had such a strong sense of family with the other DJs that were there. A lot of us were impacted by this, and most of the nightclubs started closing their doors, or not being willing or open to playing kind of this cutting edge music. And I guess to answer your question, yeah, I could have moved to some other places. I mean, New York at the time was starting to really become a focus with many of the DJs that were coming to Orlando. It went to New York. Miami was still a big hotbed of music. And I think that there was potentially an appetite for me to go and move to these cities, but I don't think that I was secure enough in being able to provide a lifestyle for myself. Not to mention, I was also working at the record shop in Orlando. That was my kind of main day job, so to speak.
Right.
And that's
how old were you around this time?
My mid-20s.
Okay.
Yeah, mid-early 20s. So I think moving to another city was just a couple of things that would have, on my own, I think I was a little insecure about finding a job that was going to be similar to my record shop job, as well as finding a nightclub that I could DJ at, that I would feel really comfortable and have the creative freedom that I did in the Orlando clubs.
If we think about this from like a mid-20-year-old that's had, I mean, you and I were talking before we started recording that people would recognize you, go into restaurants and people are like, oh my God, do you Remark? It was a sense of, not only the community, but also a sense of like, I'm on the rise and feel like I'm almost making it kind of semi-famous almost. And then to have that squashed, what sounds like relatively quickly.
Yeah.
And then the points that you've just made about the potential insecurity of moving to a new city and trying to kind of almost start again.
Yeah.
How did that feel?
Yeah, it was tough. And I should note, there were some other DJs who chose to go into the world of production, making music, and that was never an avenue that I ended up going down, production and making my own records. So a lot of DJs found that to be their kind of continued way of being creative. But yeah, it was, the wind was taken out of my sails, for sure. And maybe moving forward to when I actually did leave Orlando and moved to Dallas, Texas, which was right around the millennium 2000, I was dating someone who ended up getting a job transfer that took us to Dallas. And I said, maybe this is my opportunity. So I did move to Dallas, Texas, and it wasn't because I was driven by the music, but instead driven by some other life choices. But when I got there, I did try to get back involved into a scene. No record shop options really, but in terms of the nightclubs, I just noticed when I arrived in Dallas at the time, the scene was totally different. The music was different. And then, as you say, nobody really knows your name in the same way as they did kind of on the East Coast or in Florida. I wasn't of that level of a DJ. So, again, trying to kind of prove yourself and showcase your talent and tell people or even promoters, I was a big deal in Orlando doesn't necessarily fly when you've got people that don't know who you are when they're promoting the club nights. So, that was another big step change for those 2 years that I was there in Dallas.
Did you find that you wanted to, as a result of how you were made to feel because of things that were outside of your control? It's not like you were choosing the wrong tracks or doing bad sets. It was like it was a situational thing that had an impact on you.
Yeah.
Did you at any point feel like you wanted to take a step back from music as a whole and become like a listener as opposed to a creator or
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I wanted to take a step back, but I wanted to step away from music kind of entirely. I not so much being a listener. I think I still always was going to be a creator, but it was more around, let me just step back from having to focus on trying to make this a money-making endeavor of trying to be playing in clubs and trying to do all of these things, and instead focus on it for the sake of it being a passion and a love, and the artist, exactly, as opposed to it being something that would be more career forming.
In terms of the other elements, like if you talk late 90s, early 2000s, there was a lot of particularly technological transformations in that era. How did that impact either your time in Orlando, which I'm guessing is like vinyl, maybe the early parts of using CDs for DJing?
Yeah.
And then later in your kind of taking a step back or wanting to do it as a hobby, how did that negatively or positively impact your approach?
Yeah, it was an interesting time. There was a lot of things that happened with technology during that era. So you're right. In the 90s, vinyl was still very much the primary medium that we would use to play. All DJs play vinyl, and all of the clubs had their 1200s in the DJ booths. But towards the tail end of that decade, CD started becoming a feature, CD mixers and mixing off of compact disc. And in fact, some DJs became their main form of mixing music. So for me, there was a hybrid moment where I was using both, but I was still kind of a vinyl purist mainly. When I moved to Texas, I was still buying vinyl and doing vinyl a lot. But then 2002, I ended up moving to Atlanta, which was another great scene, by the way. That was on the East Coast, and we had some connections back to Florida. And I still was finding ways to play in clubs, and people did know of my brand and my sound. So I was playing in some clubs there and still doing it mainly off of vinyl. But a real key moment was I think it was in the mid-2000s, where we had the introduction of Serato Scratch Live. So this is a piece of vinyl and a computer is involved, where you can take any MP3 track and it actually maps the MP3 to the vinyl record. And so you can literally treat it like a record, move the needle across the 12-inch vinyl, but it's actually on the computer screen moving through the MP3 track.
Like a digital representation, but you're manipulating it like in an analog way.
Exactly. So you never take the vinyl off of your decks. You just end up changing the MP3s on your computer and just dragging and dropping. And so you have this whole very organic feeling like you're mixing records, but you can tap into your digital library. So that was a big, big change. And to be honest, that started shifting me more towards digital, which is what I pretty much do now. I still play the original vinyl, but a big portion of that time was spent using Serato Scratch Live. And I think that's really when the technology piece really started integrating digital more fully.
Okay. And then any negatives around that kind of technological advancement, not just with how it impacted your DJing, but like just the industry as a whole. I know you've worked at a particular company for quite a long time, but there was also other companies around that time that were making waves in the music industry and not always the best. And obviously, because you worked at a record store, there was a lot of impacts there too.
Yeah, the biggest difference is that there's something to be said, and vinyl junkies will know this, but there's something to be said about going in a record shop and literally flicking through the records and pulling out a record and the whole sensation of doing so. And then in the record shop that I managed, taking the records out, putting the headphones on, listening to the tracks, getting input from the people that work in the record shop about what tracks were hot, which ones were not, going out to a nightclub and hearing a DJ play a song, and then going into the record shop the next week and getting so excited that you found it. And sometimes the reverse. I remember times I would go into the record shop, listen to a song, and I'm like, oh, this is crap. And then you go out the night and then you hear it at the nightclub. You're like, holy crap, this is the best thing I've ever heard. And then you go back the next day and bought the record you put back on the shelf. In the digital world, which is what a lot of us are in now, in terms of DJ, it's not the same. I mean, I find my music online like most people who play digitally do. And even though it's still great to be able to flick through tracks digitally and to be able to scan through the files, there's just something that's different. There's some kind of magic that I feel has been lost versus
organic kind of.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And, there's also the excitement in a record shop of feeling like you bought a record that no one else got or had. And now in the digital world, hundreds of people are getting the same track quite easily because it's just sometimes easier to find, especially if they're on some of these sites that showcase certain tracks. So it's just different. But I guess that's one of the key differences that I kind of grew up through in those years.
Okay, so I'm going to switch gears for a little bit, and we'll do some quick fire stuff, right? So you've mentioned vinyl, digital, and some kind of hybrid, I guess, with the Serato stuff.
Yeah.
Which is your go-to and why?
Go-to now is digital. And the reason is because I can do things with the digital tracks that I couldn't do on vinyl.
Such as?
Two things mainly. One is that you can like loop digital tracks in the intro and the outro for as long as you want, whereas with vinyl, you're very much limited to how much more time is on the record before the needle goes off the record. So looping is a huge benefit. And then also pitching. So on vinyl, if you pitch a song up or down, in other words, increase the speed or slow the speed down, if it's like a vocal track, it's also going to affect the pitch. So the faster you go, the higher the voice, and similarly, the lower would go. So it can affect the way the song sounds. But in the digital world, you can lock the pitch, and you can go as fast as you want or as slow as you want in terms of the beats and the beats per minute, and the song will actually retain its original pitch. And that's huge, because that means you can play a whole range of stuff that you would never consider doing on vinyl, because the song will actually continue to retain its original pitch. So those are the main things, looping and pitching.
Cool. One belief that you had about DJing in the 90s that you don't hold anymore.
Oh gosh, we started talking about it at the beginning, but it's that I was going to be a big stadium filling DJ. That's one thing I don't believe anymore.
Okay. What about a moment in your career that quietly mattered more than anyone realizes?
So it was probably the biggest gig that I ever played, which actually was New Year's Eve, 1996. And I was probably in front of about 3,000 or 4,000 people, I want to say, at a New Year's Eve gig in Orlando. And that night was the night that I think I really felt that this was going to be the future. And so that really mattered. I didn't actually go out talking about it as though it was this massive thing, because at the time it just felt like it was just another great gig that I was able to get. It just so happened to be the largest one that I've ever done to date. So
how many people?
I think 3,000 or 4,000 people. Oh. That's a pretty big crowd to play to. I mean, it was a New Year's Eve event, and there were several other DJs that were part of the lineup, and I wasn't necessarily the total headline spot, but I actually was the one who led us up to midnight. And on New Year's Eve, that's a pretty big slot to go. I mean, it was an all-night party, and there were other big names to follow, but that was a really, really big night, my biggest night really ever. So
no. A trend that you're glad did not last.
Can I answer that differently and say a trend that I wish would stop?
Yeah.
And I'm noticing it more and more right now. And it's the fact that some house tracks now are like 3 minutes, 4 minutes. That is not a house track, in my opinion. That is a blip on a TikTok reel, or a song that is striving to be a radio track. Please bring back, 10-minute tracks. I mean, you can find them now, but that's definitely not the trend. Okay. So I wish that trend would stop. Let's go back and let's at least give us 5 minutes to work with, starting point.
A lesson that only time and not your talent taught you.
Yeah. Yeah, that don't judge yourself based on your perceived listenership, I guess. I think with any art, you need to do it for yourself first. If nobody's listening to your music, no matter what kind of music you do, but you love it, then I think that's important. You need to be doing it for yourself, and you need to love it for yourself. As soon as you start trying to lean into, is this going to, sell, or is this going to fill a dance floor, or is this going to fill a concert hall? I think you can start to lose the purpose of why you do these things. So I think that's what I've learned over time. You got to love the thing that you're doing, and whatever the output is.
Okay, that's a good answer. And what still surprises you about music?
Just that it keeps coming. I mean, I'll be listening to tracks and a lot of different artists and producers and DJs, and I'm just shocked at just how much new stuff continues to come out. Haven't we created everything that needs to be created ever? In serious, it's just like any kind of art form, to be honest. There's just always something new. And so in the genres that I continue to be really attracted to right now, I think that what surprises me a lot is that there's just so much great music that I can just get lost in still. I sometimes think that there's been times when I'm like, oh, all the greatest music is now behind us, but that's not true. So much continues to come out. It's really exciting.
So talking about where you are now then, if you talk about, what you're listening to and how it's making you feel, It feels like it's probably a different chapter to where you were 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
How would you describe your role today, whether it be a DJ, curator, storyteller, something else?
Yeah, I'll answer this probably in a long way, but as I mentioned, I always really believe that playing music tells a story, and whenever I go to hear DJs play, I kind of want to hear the whole set from start to finish, because I think that's the opportunity to really take your listeners on this kind of journey or experience. Years ago, when I was focused on playing out in the clubs and even started making my own CDs that I would distribute as a way of promoting myself, I would try to make sure that those 70 minutes or so, were really punchy, the kind of stuff you'd want to hear on the dance floor, and just really kind of, main hits, when I say hits, meaning like big songs that you would recognize from hearing me play out, just the big tunes. But over time, and kind of bringing it to what I do today, we're no longer limited to the 70 minutes on a CD, which is really exciting as an artist. And instead, I can make very long digital mixes now. I mean, on average, when I release a new mix, they're usually around 5 hours in length. That's a long time. I'm not necessarily expecting all listeners to sit through and put headphones on and just sit there and listen for 5 hours straight through. But the idea is that if you were to actually go on that journey from start to finish, there is actually intention behind the whole thing. And so,
what does it take you to curate the tracks and then to define the set before you even start mixing and recording or doing a live stream?
Yeah, another big question. There usually will be one song that I consider to be the foundation track inside of one of my mixes, and it'll be a song that I'm like, this has to be this is creating the vision of what I think this story would be, or this journey, maybe that's a better word. And then I maybe will find a second track or a third track, and over the course of time, we'll start to cobble together what will be probably about let's call it an hour's worth of music. And then once I've got an hour kind of core set of tracks, that is where everything starts to really be built out from. And then the question is, what is the sequence of the order of the songs? And back when I was playing in clubs, or if I have the opportunity to play in front of a live audience, a lot of times the set is driven by the reactions of the dance floor. But one of the things I love about not having a dance floor, and this is something I used to love when I had my radio show back in Orlando, is when you don't have the visual of seeing how full the dance floor is, you can actually take the music wherever you want. And so that's what really opens up the doors for me creatively. So it takes a while. Some of my mixes that I release, I can be working on for months, trying to cobble together the songs. And then sometimes when I have a handful of tracks that I really love, maybe one of the original songs that I loved, I take it off the mix because I'm like, this doesn't work anymore. It goes into another pile for maybe a future mix. So anyway, that whole tweaking and tailoring of all that takes a really long time. And then so once I'm actually happy with all of the tracks, that's when I can get behind the decks and really do a successful mix. And if it's and hopefully if it all goes the way that I envisioned, then that will become one of my podcasts. So in getting just a note about the live streams, which I do every 2 weeks on Twitch, they're 3 hours in length, so still a good amount of time. And I do program those every 2 weeks. But for me, that's more of a playground to kind of pick out a lot more tracks, see which ones I'm really loving, which ones aren't. Sometimes they're not, some are more exciting than others. But if I'm going to pick and cherry pick the ones that I really love, those are usually the ones that end up in my kind of actual properly released podcasts. And I just love not having that kind of limit of time like I did back in the day with a CD or some other form of medium that would have limited me from being creative with that many.
Or I guess even like a place and a set on a night.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you've got like an hour or two as opposed to 3, 4, 5 hours.
Yeah. And if you're in a set with playing with other DJs, you always have this interesting situation where depending on where you fall in the lineup, what are they going to be playing beforehand? Where are they going to take the crowd? And then you have to kind of follow up on that or try to figure out where you fit in. And equally, most DJ sets at clubs these days are probably going to give you 2 hours max in terms of being able to play based on how long the night goes. And that's still a good amount of time to create a journey for sure. But if I was involved, I have to be really, really focused on what songs I was going to play.
So you've said before, and I'm just thinking about your playlist creation process, that you see tracks as like colors in a painting. Is that still the case now? And if so, how is that freeing or potentially making your life a lot harder because you've got all of this time that you could potentially use, whether it be a podcast or slightly shorter, but still longer than the sets that you would do back in the day in front of a crowd on a Twitch live stream, for instance.
Yeah. Well, if we continue to use the analogy of a painting, which I really love when talking about making music or making a DJ set, you know, you think about an artist who's going to look at a blank canvas and they've got all the colors to choose from. And depending on what they want to paint or their style, you know, they can choose a handful of colors or they can choose the whole, the full paint bucket and make, you know, and create a very colorful painting. So for me, it's the same concept. You could use very few tracks to create a much more succinct kind of work of art, or you can do different types of colors to be able to create something that's much more layered, textured, and rich.
And I just wanted to add or ask an additional question. That first track that you mentioned before, what really that like defines the vibe or the style that you're going for, do you see that? And I'm just very curious here. Do you see that as like almost like a palette of colors that you could use for the rest of it?
Yeah, okay, totally. And that's kind of how I see it visually too. And I don't think it's so much as the color as much as I would think of it as style. So if you think of like what a Picasso painting looks like versus, you know, a Van Gogh, like, these are different types of styles. And, you know, you kind of recognize them, assuming you know their art, and the differences and the methods of which they use to do it. So I think of like the foundational track. Is this like, oh, is this going to be a Picasso vibe or is this going to be a Van Gogh vibe? And so, you know, and of course, then we get into the whole genres of different types of house music, which definitely play into every DJ's, you know, style. So I think that, for me lately, that's how I've got kind of a suite of genres that I can continue to kind of to play with. The sound that kind of Remark became known for back in the 90s, which I absolutely still could do and still love, is not necessarily the sound today that I really prefer in my kind of 5+ hour journeys. So I'm going to be churning out music on a regular. It's kind of a different sound, you know. If I were to play the music that I'm playing now, back in the 90s, people are like, okay, this is not Remark. Who is this? Because the sound has changed. But I don't see it as a different kind of version of myself. I see it as me choosing a different type of approach to the colors. And that makes sense.
So it's not like an evolution of your style per se. It's more like just your ability to be able to be way more flexible with the direction you decide to go in on a particular set.
Totally. Yeah. And actually, it's another thing I actually, kind of going to a point you mentioned earlier, one of the things that's changed a lot since the 1990s and even early 2000s is that there used to be a time when I think DJs and even people that went out to hear DJs or go to the dance floor were much more open to playing in different genres all within one night or within one set. You could actually start off with a quite vocal house, kind of hands in the air, piano vibe, and end up, you know, 2 hours later in a very dark, progressive, kind of more late night vibe, and your dance floor would have totally enjoyed and gone on that whole journey with you over that 2 hour period. I would say now, DJs are pretty much siloed into a certain type of sound. I'm generalizing here. But I think in my experience, you know, now DJs very much are labeled by the kind of sound you expect to find. And so if you're going to go out and hear a DJ play, or if I'm going to go and listen to one, and because I want them to deliver on the sound that I expect them to deliver. And I just think that's just how we've just evolved over time with DJs being much more specific about the types of music that they play. And also I think people that go out into dance floors are probably a little less flexible with being open to hearing different types of music because, they go out because they want to hear a specific type of sound. So that's definitely something I think that's evolved.
Okay. And then just touching back on your, visual aspects of your creation process for something that is very much auditory. To look at your catalog, you would notice that this is someone that takes a lot of care in the visual aspect of like, whether it be like, you know, your cover artwork.
Yeah.
If we were going to call it that. And I know that you have some influences and you did study graphic design, but how important is that part of it? But also, is that then also inspired by that initial palette style vibe that comes from those first initial tracks?
That's a good question. To answer the first part, yes, I'm totally obsessed with graphic design, and that was at one point something else that I thought I was going to do when I got out of the kind of started tiptoeing out of the music scene as it relates to being a way of making an income, I did go back to school for graphic design and web design. So I do have a passion for that. I also follow a lot of artists and bands and DJs that have really prioritized design, because I do think there's something to be said with not just the music, but the overall package or the overall visual, so to speak. But back to your question, yes, I would say that the sound or the foundational sound or the kind of genre or whatever that particular mix is does influence what I think the design will be. I mean, here's a great example. So 2 summers ago, I released a kind of very uplifting, hands in the air, let's call it a Pride DJ mix, which I quite love. A lot of great songs that are uplifting with vocals and maybe do have pop songs that people would recognize. And I do really continue to love that. I was really thinking about how can I make this a really fun looking cover. So I decided to call the mix Roy G. Biv, which is, for those who grew up in school, particularly in the United States, that's red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. It's the colors of the rainbow, which was a nod to the pride flag. And then if you look at the new pride flag, the way it's designed, I basically flipped it up and it becomes an M. And then I created an R with another rainbow kind of logo. So it's an RM, but the M is actually the pride flag just turned sideways. So that's just a really great example of how the foundation of the music, which was this really uplifting, kind of fun house that was definitely tied to Pride season, just played directly into the way that the design of the cover came into play. So that's a real direct link. Sometimes it's more subtle.
Okay. So that sounds like, I mean, what you're describing there and what we've discussed is very much like how much easier, I guess, some of this stuff is to be able to do compared to, like, if you were trying to do that stuff in the 90s, you would have found that probably quite hard. Maybe you had to hire someone to do it, or
totally,
so yeah. Your entire creative process is then easier for you to control and have that vision and make it come to life in the form of live streams or your graphics or anything else. So thinking of the future, is there anything that is exciting for you when it comes to the creativity as a whole right now?
I don't think there's anything that's exciting me more than what's exciting me now. I mean, there's nothing that's coming, I think, ahead that I'm looking at that I'm really, excited about. I think right now I found a really great balance of the way that I'm creating music and also the way that I'm designing the visual to go along with it. But you're right, 100%. Back in the 90s or even early 2000s, it wasn't not nearly as easy to kind of do that on my own as it is these days.
I feel like we're in a second sort of technological revolution, or at least the precipice of that eventually happening. So when it comes to being creative, we can obviously use some of those tools if we're creative folk, as opposed to using them and claiming to be able to do it, and not really understanding the art form prior to using some tools to do it for us.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm asking is, in the hands of someone like yourself that is thinking about the entire package, how does that change your approach, if it does at all? How does it impact it?
Yeah, I don't know if it does. I mean, just recently on a different type of music that I sometimes make, which is not house music, I have another series called Remark Back to Mine, which is a collection of, again, storytelling, curated tracks in usually an ambient focus, where songs blend into one another. And it's actually inspired by another series called Back to Mine, which came out in the 1990s, in fact, which was intended to be things that you would chill out to. So I've got a whole series, but maybe to answer your question, recently I released a Back to Mine, and I had this whole idea of what I wanted the visual to look like. And but I knew it was kind of going to take me a long time if I was going to kind of design it by hand. So I tapped into some AI tools, like everybody seems to be doing these days, to see if it could augment or add to my creative intentions. And sure enough, it delivered. I was able to go in and kind of put in some ideas and prompts about what it was that I wanted the kind of cover art to look like and the promotional art and everything that went along with it. Because I believe in the whole visual kind of and design intention, much like I do for my house music DJ mixes. But with this, I just wanted to explore that whole avenue. And it was it was awesome. So I felt that it was a great way to see my kind of visual and my ideas come to life. So if I was going to maybe answer more broadly, I could absolutely see how tapping into these types of tools and resources could be helpful with any creator to try to kind of augment and help their creative process.
Okay, so thinking about AI, we might as well talk about it. Yeah, we worked at Apple. We know the technology. Apple, has been pivotal in changing some elements of the music industry. But talking about AI, which is what I was alluding to before, as being this potential thing that's going to, make or break many industries potentially. You just mentioned that you use it for yourself and you've had positive results. But do you feel that there's a potential threat element to AI and its usage? Or, is it a tool that creators can use to be more efficient or to help their vision become a reality? Or is it potentially something else?
No, I think it's more the latter there. I absolutely think creators using it wisely can help bring their creativity to life or add another flavor or color or nuance to what they do or their creative output. I think the risk is if it, entirely takes over the creative process, or if we're listening to AI DJs as opposed to real ones. And sure, AI might get to the point where it's able to pick songs in ways that are perfectly, not only beat matched, of course, but also perfectly programmed and sequenced. And it may even do things with songs that we can't currently do easily now. But I know that as a listener and someone who wants to continue to be a creator, I would not want to use AI in that way or see it used that way. And I think most musicians or most artists are feeling the same way. I think we'll actually even be willing in the future, we're not there yet, to be willing to pay more for, art of any type. Yeah, exactly. That we know is fully human made. And I just actually saw Bandcamp, which is a popular website where bands can upload their music and actually get all the royalties and all the money from it directly, kind of without some of the big record companies do. And I think they've been the first platform to ban AI music full stop. So you can't even put it on there. I think the question we'll have to answer in the coming years is, I'm sure when AI starts to settle fully into the industries, I'm sure there'll be a balance of trying to figure out how does AI play a role in these different fields. It's too early to tell, I think. I'm sure if we were involved in technologies of the past, whether it's television taking away from the arts on stage, or whether it's, television taking away from radio, since radio was the first thing, all of these technologies have continued to exist. And we still like to go out and see a play in person as opposed to watching a movie, or going to the cinema versus watching it at home. There's a number of different other analogies we could use, but I think AI right now is at a point where we just need to see where it goes.
So it's interesting that you talked about potentially there being a premium on the human element to it. And I guess almost the kind of organic mistakes, nuances, things that happen that could only happen by a person live. So looking back at, the times that you were on stage in front of, people and kind of potentially flying by the seat of your pants, based on where you fit in the set or where the audience were taking you as well as you were taking them. Do you think that there's anything that's been lost since then?
Well, yeah, I'm going to answer the question, but probably not answer it in the way that you expect. And that's when I was really involved in the club scene, doing it back in those days, sounding really dated now by saying it that way. The music was the focus for sure. The DJ was absolutely steering the experience, but quite often they'd be nestled up in a dark corner, or, they were, or maybe they would be on stage, but that was not like the purpose. The purpose was there to be there connected with everyone. Critically, it's important, there were no iPhones or devices to record anything that was happening, and that made it also very special.
It was almost like a one night only experience.
Exactly. So fast forward to today's, let's call it, club world. First off, you're pretty much going to find phones everywhere on a dance floor. I mean, granted, there are some clubs that have started to either, ban it or not have you use it, or encourage you not to do it. But ultimately, the opportunity is in everyone's pocket still to be able to film a moment. And the DJs have become like these gods that, much like a concert, you go and see them on a stage and everybody's there with their phones out filming, and they're not actually experiencing, the moment. I mean, and I've even been guilty of this, by the way. So it's not like I'm saying this is some high and mighty moment where I'm like, oh, I just go to the clubs and, but, I really think that has been lost. And so whereas I think the younger generation of people that actually want to go see those DJs and see them on these huge stadiums and these huge festivals where the stage is like, massive and the graphics are behind it so mind blowing to watch. And there's some DJs that I've seen that are just, that's fantastic, but it's totally different from what it was many years ago, when I think the vibe was much more around the people that were right next to you in this very packed club, knowing there was a DJ somewhere in some dark box in a corner, even if you knew it was someone really big who's steering this whole moment. And as you rightly say, the next morning you walk away and, there were no pictures or videos captured. It was just, in the moment. And in fairness, there's been a resurgence. In fact, there's a DJ, his name is Lane 8. He's been a pioneer of creating this event called This Never Happened, I think is the brand he's created. And he has absolutely been hardcore about like not one phone on the dance floor anywhere for his shows. And there's been some other DJs that have kind of joined in on that bandwagon, but that's been branded as such. And so you go to these events now, you don't have people with phones filming him right up close when he's doing his DJing. I mean, people are really there in it for the music. And, it's kind of on the extreme side in terms of his his needs, but nonetheless, I think that he's just one of the most obvious versions of someone who's definitely said, no, this doesn't feel right. So anyway, I think that's one of the big changes. So it's been kind of a different journey.
That kind of leads me on to my next question about we live in a society or a world that's very instantaneous. Everything's available immediately. You were even talking before we started recording about being able to create your mixes and add chapters on, like in iTunes back in the day, so you could skip between the songs in this mix. So where in that case, and we know about like TikTok and other, short form content is like number one at the moment. So where do your 3 to 5 hour mixes, human made, human created mixes fit in this world of instantaneous fixes?
Oh yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. Me sitting in my room by myself with headphones on, listening to what I've made. I do think there is still an audience for it, for sure. I mean, clearly, because I got lots of people to tell me that, and they really want to experience it. I think it's just about intention. I think, when you're scrolling through your phone and you're getting those kind of quick hits of those music moments, or 3-minute songs like I referenced earlier, which seems to be the new trend. I think it targets an audience, it targets a purpose. For me, I think if you're going to go out and experience the current Remark sound, you're going to put on one of my mixes, you have to go in it with intention. This is something that you need to I'm here to really pay attention to the music. I'm here to really, and many of us do things throughout the day, whether it's driving to and from work, whether it's being on a train for a long period of time, whether it's on a flight. There's many moments where you can actually immerse yourself unobstructed and pay attention to something. And I think those are the moments that I really want my listeners to kind of immerse themselves. And even though I joked about listening to my music by myself and with headphones, sometimes I think that people might be at home doing that too. I mean, just really getting into it and then saying, right, where is this journey going to take me? Where is this moment going to take me? And we didn't talk about this, but kind of going back to the packaging and the visual, the amount of thought that goes into the name of one of my mixes is that can take forever as well. I mean, sometimes that's the last thing to come, but I'll just use my most recent mix that I released called Architect, which came out at the end of last year. I mean, it was a word that I had chosen, which is, of course, a play on the word architect, but also tech, T-E-C-H, which is like the tech house or a progressive tech, which is a genre of music. And so I had this concept of architect and putting these two words together. And that was actually the first thing, and I built then all of the sound around it. So that is what defined a lot of the sound. And then that also, by the way, is definitely what defined the graphics. So the visual that came along with it was built around this architect concept. so anyway, listening to the music and putting it on and kind of going back to the question, and by the way, yeah, it's about 5 hours. I think it's 4 hours and 50. When you actually the opening track on that, I think I discovered in 2022, and it's been sitting there kind of just simmering. And it finally saw the light of day in 2025. So 3 years later, that opening track finally had its moment. And so, if you put on the track or put on the mix, the intention behind the title of the song of the mix, you see the graphic, and then you hear that first song. It's a ride. And that's like, it's like getting onto I don't want to say a roller coaster because that feels too much up and down. It's more like a slow, a slow roller coaster maybe, and you're just getting yourself strapped in on that very first track. And this is the case for all my mixes, but I'm just thinking about that one now because it's front of mind in a recent creation. So, yeah.
Okay. So before we wrap this up, let's zoom out to, we've talked about your history or your past, your early days of your career, where you are now and what you're doing. This will probably be a very easy question for you to ask, but why, what keeps you doing this after all of these years? You said earlier on that, have we not made all of the songs yet? So yeah, why keep doing it? What keeps you going? What makes you think I'm going to get that record, or I need to peruse these new tracks that people have put out and see what I can add?
Yeah. For me, it's just continuing to tell more stories and to share more creative moments. Kind of bringing it back to the celebration of 20 years of the Remarkable podcast, which I can't believe has been now broadcasting since 2006, which, to be fair, was actually almost the next evolution after my radio show, which I had for over 10 years in the US. What's been so great about that is that I've just been able to continue to share my creations and my story through that platform. I was podcasting before podcasting was a thing, really. Everybody has a podcast. This will be on a podcast in the format people are probably familiar with now. For me, there's always something more to say. There's always another song to share. There's always another journey to get on and explore and to go on. So in terms of what's next, I want to continue to put, music out. I have a queue of all kinds of different flavors. I've got a file in my notes app that has one single word titles of things that I want to have as future mixes, but I've not yet found the songs to match the title. And equally, I've got a handful of playlists that are still kind of in there, some of which actually are pretty much done. I mentioned Architect earlier. There's already an Architect too. In fact, at one point I was even promoting it, but it was going to be a 2-part series. But that it's not seen the light of day yet. It's still kind of brewing back there, but that's a story that needs to be told. So for me, it's just around continuing to share that, and I think that's probably true for any artist, any songwriter, any painter, any poet. They probably have, they just have more to say, and it's just what platform and what medium do you choose to do it. So that's something that I'll continue doing for sure.
Okay. And if we think about your, documentary, from the 90s, the late 90s, if someone is listening to this interview years from now, what's one thing that you want them to take away from it?
I don't know. Slow down and pay attention to my music, I guess. Don't do the 3-minute tracks.
Yeah.
Don't flick to the next story.
Leave the skip button alone.
Leave the skip button alone. Just ease into it. And then just see where it takes you. Yeah.
Okay. So on that note, where will the future take you? What's it looking like if you think about the next 10, 20 years?
Well, retirement is coming into play from my day job. And that'll just give me more time to create, which I'm really excited about. So very much looking forward to that. As I mentioned, I do have a handful of different mixes and things. I'll keep doing my live streams. By the way, I should also just have a nod to the live stream unlock, because back in, 2019 and before, my main output was through the Remarkable podcast and my other platforms, Mixcloud and SoundCloud. But there was really no visual to when I say visual, meaning there was no me performing. I mean, there was the random time that I'd still play out in a club now and again, but generally speaking, people seeing me on the regular and hearing my music on the regular was not happening as much. But when COVID happened, so many DJs around the world who were playing in nightclubs, had to switch up their platform to play on live streams, because that's where everybody was at home and the DJs weren't in the clubs because the clubs were closed. And so I kind of got on that live stream bandwagon because I'm like, oh, this will be a great way to start to share music. And it did have a pretty explosive moment in 2020, 21 where seems like everybody was a live streamer. And then it settled down now. But being able to do a live stream every 2 weeks, Remark Sunday Sessions, as we come to know them and be branded as, have been so great. So now there's the opportunity for me to create my small little Twitch dance floor community, some of which have been some of my fans way back from the 90s who end up popping up on my virtual dance floor. Oh my God, I remember you, Remark. To a lot of new school folks, to people I've not even met in person before, but tune in every 2 weeks just because they want to hear my vibe. And so, much like my video show back in the day, that gives me the opportunity to have a creative space to play with different types of genres and sound and music. And so, kind of coming back to the question, if I'm retired in the next 10, 20 years, as long as I'm able, maybe I'll do more live streams. I'll have more time on my hands to do it. It's actually been a really great way to kind of complement my Remarkable podcast official DJ mixes, along with my now abilities to do it live every 2 weeks, which is pretty cool.
Thank you so much for taking this time to reflect. For anyone that's listening, where can we find, other than this podcast and whatever you're watching or listening to this on?
Yeah.
Where else? You mentioned Twitch, you mentioned the live streams. Is there anything else that you would want to direct listeners or viewers to? Yeah,
of course. I mean, you can check out the Remarkable podcast. We're celebrating 20 years of that. That's available on Apple Podcasts and also on Podbean. So that has mixes going all the way back to 2006. That's when it actually debuted. But there's even an archive that goes back further in terms of music that I uploaded on there. So that's one way to listen. SoundCloud and Mixcloud. You can find me on my handle, Remark Central. So both of those have tons of tracks. In fact, I record every one of my live streams and upload it to Mixcloud and SoundCloud, so you can listen there. And then Twitch every 2 weeks, 6 p.m. UK time on Remark Sunday Sessions, twitch.tv/Remark Central. So check out all the links. There's lots of ways to continue to listen to my tunes.
Amazing. Thank you, Mark. Hopefully we'll be sat here in another 20 years' time talking about how the world's changed.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Till then.
Cool.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Matt.